Chosen one, there was one decision heaven had been waiting on, and that decision has already been made. It may have looked small to everyone around you. There may have been no celebration, no recognition, no dramatic moment anyone could point to. Yet something shifted in the unseen when you stopped agreeing with the version of yourself that kept returning to what was already behind you. You did not simply walk away from something. You crossed into something new. You moved from striving into trust. You moved from uncertainty into obedience. You moved from surviving each day into finally placing the weight of your life into God's hands. You stopped waiting for permission to become who He had already shown you that you were meant to be, and heaven witnessed that moment. That is why your spirit feels different now. That is why old conversations feel heavier than they once did, and why familiar temptations no longer pull on you in the same way. You may feel tired, yet there is a clarity within you. You may feel emotional, yet there is a steadiness underneath it all. Deep inside, something already knows that the season of waiting has changed. Let this message meet you gently today. Let it settle over your heart and confirm what your soul has sensed for some time. The waiting season has reached its turning point, but the first step after breakthrough carries its own sacred responsibility. Protect what heaven has just brought you out of, and resist the urge to return to what no longer belongs to you. There is a kind of grief that comes after obedience. Everything around you may appear unchanged. The room looks the same, the day feels ordinary, and nothing outside seems to announce that a miracle has happened. Yet within you, something feels marked. Something feels different, even if you cannot fully explain it yet. You only know that going back no longer feels possible. The old desires have lost their grip. The same conflicts no longer draw the same reaction from your heart. The old door may still be standing there, but it no longer feels like it was built for the person you are becoming. This is not confusion. This is what crossing over feels like. Sometimes the soul arrives before the circumstances do. Your spirit may have already agreed with what God revealed, while the rest of your life is still catching up. That can leave you feeling vulnerable, exposed, and even surprised by the calm that has begun settling over you. Yet God saw every step of this process, even the ones nobody else understood. He saw the moment you chose integrity instead of betraying yourself. He saw the message you left unanswered and the conversation you finally released. He saw the moment you stopped seeking validation from people who were never assigned to confirm what He had already spoken. He saw the trembling in your hands when you closed the door, and He saw the courage it took to stop explaining your pain to those who benefited from your confusion. He also saw the moment you finally trusted the warning that had been stirring in your spirit for so long. To others, it may have looked insignificant. In heaven's eyes, it was agreement. That is the word over this season of your life. Not performance, not perfection, not public proof. Simply agreement. For a long time you prayed for freedom while still leaving room for the very things that kept you bound. You asked for a new season while remaining connected to old chains. You longed for peace, yet part of you kept returning to the places that taught you how to live without it. There is no shame in that. Pain often teaches people to trust what is familiar, even when it hurts. Loneliness can make unhealthy things feel comforting. Delays can cause even sincere hearts to question their own discernment. Then there comes a sacred moment when God does not raise His voice. Instead, He allows your spirit to become so honest that pretending is no longer possible. That moment becomes the turning point. You did not need a crowd standing beside you. You did not need a title, a platform, or a flawless plan. What you needed was one genuine act of alignment. One moment when you stopped abandoning the truth God had already placed inside you. That was the move. That is why the atmosphere feels different now. Something has been marked in the unseen. The old season may still linger nearby, and it may still try to remind you of who you used to be, but it no longer has the authority to define you. It can knock at the door, but it cannot reclaim what God has already brought into freedom. Look closely at what has been changing inside you. You stopped chasing understanding from people who were never meant to carry your calling. You stopped pretending everything was fine while your spirit was exhausted. You stopped trying to coexist with the very things that kept stealing your peace. That was not weakness leaving you. That was discernment awakening. Perhaps you have noticed that old environments feel heavier now. The same places, the same voices, the same patterns somehow feel different. It is not always because they changed. Often it is because your agreement changed and your spirit no longer finds rest in what drains it. You may also feel grief and freedom living side by side. That can be confusing. You may wonder why tears still come when you know God has released you from something. Yet grief is not always evidence of a wrong decision. Sometimes grief is simply the sound of your soul leaving a place it once called home. You are not fighting the same way anymore. You are seeing more clearly. Instead of trying to win old battles, you are beginning to ask whether those battles belong in the life God is building within you. You have not become cold, hard, or uncaring. You have simply stopped abandoning your own heart. That is why some people may misunderstand your healing. They may call your boundaries distance. They may call your growth pride. They may call your obedience attitude. Let them say what they need to say. You are not responsible for making everyone comfortable with the person you are becoming. Some people only knew how to relate to the version of you that continually sacrificed itself to keep everything else functioning. When healing began, they did not lose access to your love. They lost access to your self-abandonment. There is another change happening as well. You no longer have the same tolerance for every voice, every opinion, or every emotional urgency demanding your attention. Something within you has become more discerning. You are learning the difference between pressure and guidance. Pressure pushes you back toward old cycles. Guidance steadies you toward obedience. Pressure is loud and demanding. Guidance is often quiet, yet it leaves a settled certainty in your spirit. Yes, you are tired. The tears were real, the long nights were real. But underneath all of it is a clarity that cannot be ignored. You may not feel excitement yet, but you know something has ended, and you know the old season no longer gets the final word. That is why heaven waited. Not because you needed more suffering, not because love had to be earned, not because your faith was lacking. Heaven was waiting for agreement. Heaven was waiting for the moment when your choices finally aligned with the very prayers you had been praying. Some doors cannot open while part of you is still asking the old season for permission to leave. Some blessings require open hands. Some answers arrive only after you release what God has already shown you to release. He was never withholding from you. He was preparing you. What felt like silence was never abandonment. It was holy work taking place beneath the surface. God was exposing hidden loyalties, revealing false agreements, and showing you where fear had disguised itself as wisdom. He was helping you see what had been keeping you tied to what could no longer carry you. Think about the moment when Moses and the people stood before the sea. Egypt was behind them. The water stretched out in front of them. Returning meant bondage, and moving forward required trust. Many chosen ones know that feeling well. The sea did not part while they were debating whether to go back. It opened when they chose to move forward. One act of obedience, one step toward what seemed impossible. Heaven was never asking them to explain the path. Heaven was asking them to agree with it. And the move you made carries that same kind of weight. Maybe you did not lift a staff. Maybe your move looked simple from the outside. Maybe it was closing a door that had stayed open for too long. Maybe it was choosing not to send another message, offering forgiveness without returning to the same cycle, speaking a truth you had avoided, or finally allowing yourself to rest when guilt kept demanding that you prove your worth. Whatever it was, do not minimize it simply because it happened quietly. Some of the most life-changing decisions happen far from public view. They happen in silent rooms where nobody applauds, nobody understands the battle taking place inside you, and nobody sees how much courage it takes to keep moving forward. Heaven saw every part of that moment. It saw the comfort you attempted to cling to, the familiar attachment pulling at your heart, and the fear that whispered you might be making the wrong choice. Yet even with all of that present, you chose the cleaner path. That is why this moment carries weight. You are standing at a threshold now, aware that something has opened before you, but still learning how to step through it with wisdom. God is not teaching you to rush. He is teaching you to move with reverence, patience, and trust. The decision itself may seem smaller than you expected, but its impact reaches farther than you realize. Perhaps it was the choice to stay silent instead of defending yourself. Perhaps it was the decision to stop using pain as evidence that you belonged in the past. Maybe it was the moment you stopped mistaking confusion for love, delay for humility, or fear for discernment. Maybe it was simply the moment you admitted that peace had become necessary. Let that truth settle into your spirit. What happened was neither accidental nor insignificant. Heaven was never waiting for public validation, applause, or visible proof. It was waiting for alignment. It was waiting for the moment your inner yes finally matched the prayers you had been carrying, and that moment has arrived. What opens through alignment is different from what opens through striving. Striving pushes and forces. Alignment allows God to unlock what was already prepared. That is why this next season begins with a sense of release rather than urgency. It begins with the quiet confidence that comes when your spirit finally stops resisting what it already knows. Chosen one, this matters more than you realize. Even after you make the move, heaven does not always respond by immediately changing everything around you. Often the first gift is clarity. Because clarity is one of the greatest mercies after a long season of confusion. It does not always arrive as celebration. Sometimes it arrives as a deep knowing that settles in your chest and refuses to leave. That knowing can be both peaceful and painful. You begin to recognize truths you can no longer ignore, and in that recognition you may grieve the things you once accepted. This is often one of the earliest signs that something is truly shifting. The change begins within. The old room feels different. The familiar voice sounds different. The pattern that once felt like home suddenly feels heavy. Familiarity and peace are not the same thing. You may have prayed for a visible breakthrough, for an answer, a door, a relationship, provision, or a sign. Yet God understands that without clarity, even a blessing can become another place where you lose yourself. So before anything else, He helps you see clearly. He allows you to recognize what strengthens your spirit and what drains it. He allows old cycles to reveal themselves without the fog that once made them seem acceptable. This is not punishment. It is protection. It is grace, helping you see what was always there. That is why some conversations feel different now. The words may be the same, but they no longer settle into your heart the way they once did. The behavior may be unchanged, yet you no longer create excuses for it. Your spirit has stopped turning disorder into something it can call love. Do not resist that clarity. Welcome it. It is evidence that the crossing was real. The old season may still try to speak to you, but it no longer holds the same power. What once pulled you in now reveals itself for what it is. What once trapped you is becoming a lesson rather than a prison. After clarity often comes separation, and this is where many people feel the ache most deeply. Separation does not always feel like freedom at first. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like rejection, even when God is creating space for something healthier to grow. You may notice people drifting away. You may notice certain relationships losing their warmth. You may discover that some connections only functioned when you were confused, constantly available, apologizing for yourself, or easy to reach at any moment. When your agreement changed, everything connected to the old agreement felt the shift. The truth is that some people were connected to your wounds rather than your purpose. Some were attached to the version of you that always made room for everyone else while neglecting yourself. Some appreciated your gifts but struggled to celebrate your growth. Some benefited from your exhaustion because it allowed everything to remain comfortable for them. That is why obedience is often followed by separation. God may reduce certain voices before strengthening your own. He may loosen old bonds before releasing what comes next. Not everyone who walked beside you in the wilderness is meant to walk with you into the season ahead. Do not assume every removal is a loss. Some removals are acts of rescue. Do not mistake every silence for abandonment. Sometimes silence gives your nervous system permission to rest after years of bracing for impact. Do not assume every ending is failure. Some endings are simply making room for a cleaner beginning. You may even experience what feels like growth guilt. Your spirit recognizes that change is happening, while old conditioning tries to convince you that protecting yourself is wrong. You may worry that your boundaries disappoint people. You may wonder if choosing peace somehow makes you selfish. Listen carefully. You are not responsible for making everyone comfortable with your obedience. You are not required to keep sacrificing yourself so others never have to adjust. You are not obligated to carry expectations from an old season into the assignment God is forming now. This is where many people struggle. They leave the old cycle behind and then become unsettled by the empty space it leaves behind. They question themselves. They wonder if they overreacted. They wonder if the cost was too high. But that empty space is not evidence of a mistake. It is evidence that something finally left. A room feels unfamiliar after years of clutter have been cleared away. A wound can feel tender while it heals. A soul that spent years surviving under pressure may need time to recognize what peace feels like. And there is something deeper happening here. After clarity comes separation, and after separation comes capacity. Yet before we go further, notice this with compassion. Your spirit may have already crossed into a new place, while your mind and body are still learning how to live there. Some people make the right move and still feel tired. They still feel foggy, scattered, slow, or uncertain at times. They know something has changed, yet parts of them are still adjusting to life beyond the rhythm of survival. That does not mean the crossing was incomplete. It simply means your whole being is learning how to catch up with what your spirit already knows. There are moments when you know God has spoken, yet your mind still feels exhausted from everything it has carried. You sense that a new door has opened, but parts of your inner world still move according to old patterns shaped by stress, disappointment, and years of survival. For some of you, a quiet question may be rising beneath the surface. What if the fog you have fought for so long was never who you were? What if the heaviness you carried was never evidence that you were behind, broken, or somehow less worthy of what God promised? What if life slowly trained you away from the clarity that was always meant to be yours? Hold that question gently for now. There is wisdom in letting certain truths unfold with care. What matters in this moment is remembering that God restores more than circumstances. He also restores the inner places that help you recognize, receive, and wisely carry what He is bringing into your life. This is why capacity matters. Capacity is not the blessing itself. It is the space within you that can hold the blessing without turning it into fear, pressure, or self-sabotage. It is the ability to receive peace without questioning it, to receive love without expecting loss, to receive provision without guilt, and to receive direction without immediately resisting it. Many people pray for open doors while overlooking the inner healing required to walk through them. They ask for visibility while still depending on approval. They ask for love while bracing for abandonment. They ask for provision while feeling uncomfortable receiving it. God sees those deeper places, and His love is too complete to ignore them. He is not only preparing the answer to your prayer, He is preparing the version of you that can carry that answer well. That is why the waiting season was never empty. Every delay was creating space. Every silence was accomplishing something beneath the surface. Every loss was tearing away what no longer belonged. Every lonely stretch was setting you apart for something new. What looked like nothing happening was often God making room inside you for what could never fit within the old patterns. This is formation. This is preparation. He is teaching your heart that goodness can come close without disappearing. He is teaching your body that peace is safe. He is teaching your mind that clarity does not require panic in order to be real. Chosen one, receiving can feel unfamiliar when survival has taught you to fight for everything. You may be accustomed to striving, proving, anticipating problems, and preparing yourself for disappointment before it arrives. When the pressure finally begins to lift, the quiet can feel strange. Sometimes it feels so unfamiliar that part of you wants to fill the silence with the very noise you prayed to escape. That does not mean you failed. It simply means healing is teaching you a new way to live. The soul can sometimes miss what wounded it because familiar pain feels easier to recognize than unfamiliar peace. That is why this message continues returning to the same truth. Protect what God has already established in you. You do not need to repeat the move to prove it mattered. You do not need another test, another sign, or another round of the same lesson. What you need now is to guard the agreement that was created when you finally said yes. Allow clarity to keep speaking. Allow separation to finish its work. Allow your capacity to grow without returning to the places that made you forget who you were. Take a moment and breathe. Let your shoulders relax. Let your hands rest open. You do not have to chase the next answer today. You do not have to convince anyone that you deserve what God is doing in your life. Grace has already begun its work, and you are allowed to rest inside that reality. Let this day be simple. Let the room be quiet if it needs to be. Let your body learn that obedience does not always have to be followed by fear. Let yourself experience God's presence without turning it into another performance. One honest breath is enough. One human moment of surrender is enough. Even if the outside of your life has not fully reflected what has already changed within you, there is nothing you need to force right now. There is nothing to fix, nothing to announce, and nothing to prove. The decision has been made. The threshold has been crossed. Your role in this moment is simply to stand in the peace of knowing that God saw your yes. Yet there is another truth that deserves your attention. The old season does not always disappear the moment a new one begins. Sometimes it returns quietly. Sometimes it arrives through a memory, a feeling of guilt, a familiar voice, or a subtle invitation to question what God already confirmed. This is why discernment becomes so important after breakthrough. The move itself was powerful, but what follows must be protected. Old cycles often return disguised as something harmless. They may even sound reasonable, yet your spirit knows the difference between guidance and pressure. Pressure rushes you, guilt tries to make you smaller, fear attempts to rename what God already established. Nostalgia has a way of polishing old cages until they start looking like home again. Be careful with that temptation. Something can feel familiar and still be unfit for the life you are building now. Heaven did not bring you into clarity so you could exchange it for comfort. Heaven did not free you so you could rebuild what once held you captive. Heaven did not expand your capacity so you could pour yourself back into places that never honored the value of your spirit. The door is open. The agreement is real. The shift has already happened. What comes next is not about proving your strength. It is about refusing to negotiate with what God has already led you beyond. Sometimes the old season waits until you feel calm before it speaks again. It does not always arrive as obvious temptation. Sometimes it arrives through a memory that softens the truth. Sometimes it comes through guilt. Sometimes it arrives through one message, one invitation, or one familiar opportunity that makes you wonder if returning would really matter. That is why protecting the move matters so much. Old patterns rarely surrender easily. They may whisper that you were too firm. They may tell you that you misunderstood what God was saying. They may encourage you to check one more time, revisit one more conversation, or reopen one more door. Yet so many cycles are revived through that single phrase, one more time. One more time can slowly pull a person back into a room they were meant to leave behind. One more time can delay what God already opened. One more time can disguise guilt as compassion while quietly asking you to surrender the peace you fought so hard to find. The greatest danger after crossing a threshold is not always rebellion. Sometimes it is familiarity. You can know something was unhealthy for you and still miss certain parts of it. You can know God brought you out and still feel tenderness toward the place where you learned to survive. That tenderness does not mean you should return. It means you are human. It means parts of your story carried real emotions and real needs. It means your soul may still be grieving what your spirit already understands. It cannot bring into the next season. You do not need to turn people into villains in order to move forward. You do not need to rewrite every memory as darkness. Freedom does not require hatred. It simply requires honesty. Tell the truth about what that connection produced in your life. Tell the truth about whether it led you toward peace or toward abandoning yourself. Some things were never evil. They simply reached their ending. Some things in your life were never meant to last forever. They were not evil, broken, or cursed. They simply reached the end of their purpose. Some people were connected to a version of you that carried wounds, fears, and patterns that God is gently leading you beyond. There is a mature kind of wisdom that can honor what once was while still recognizing it is time to move forward. True spiritual growth does not require drama to create distance. It does not need anger to close a chapter or public approval to validate a private decision. It can quietly acknowledge the lessons that were learned while also refusing to shrink back into spaces that no longer fit. There is strength in blessing what shaped you and still choosing not to return. Sometimes the old season comes back through guilt. It reminds you of who depended on you. It questions your choices and makes you wonder whether protecting your peace is somehow selfish. Yet guilt is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it is simply the discomfort that comes when unhealthy patterns lose their hold. Other times the old season returns through nostalgia. Memory has a way of highlighting the warm moments while hiding the deeper realities that caused pain. It can make an old cage look welcoming and turn survival into something that feels romantic. Be careful when memories begin telling a softer story than the truth. Loneliness can also become a doorway through which the past tries to return. There are moments when freedom feels quieter than expected. There are days when the absence of chaos can feel strangely empty because your nervous system is still adjusting to peace. Yet not every empty space needs to be filled. Some spaces exist because God is preparing room for something healthier to grow. The past may also return disguised as urgency. It may convince you that a decision must be made immediately. It may make pressure feel wise and peace feel slow. Yet God's guidance does not require panic. His direction may be firm, but it never asks you to betray yourself in the process. When uncertainty appears, ask yourself a simple and honest question. Does this lead me toward peace or back toward fear? Does it bring greater clarity or does it pull me back into confusion? Does it honor the step I already took or does it ask me to reverse it? Chosen one. Peace and familiarity are not the same thing. Peace may feel unfamiliar because you are still learning how to live inside it. Familiarity can feel comforting even when it carries old wounds. One stretches you toward healing, while the other quietly invites you back into patterns that no longer belong in your life. For a long time you may have felt as though you were standing before a gate that refused to open. You prayed, questioned, waited, and watched others move forward while wondering whether your own moment would ever come. Yet the gate was never closed because you were forgotten. It remained closed because some things could not be carried into the place God was preparing for you. Then something changed. You released an old agreement. You stopped asking the wrong places to become what they were never meant to be. You stopped calling exhaustion loyalty and stopped allowing fear to disguise itself as wisdom. In that moment, something aligned. You may not have seen the shift with your eyes, but heaven recognized it. The threshold responded. The gate responded. What effort could never force obedience quietly unlocked. The key was never louder striving. The key was alignment. Now guard what has opened. Do not use your new clarity to return to old confusion. Do not use renewed strength to carry burdens that have already expired. Do not pour the peace God restored back into patterns that repeatedly drained your spirit. Many people return to old doors because the new season feels too quiet. They mistake silence for abandonment and space for rejection. They assume that because chaos is gone, nothing is happening. Yet some of God's deepest work happens in places where performance is no longer required. This is why restoration reaches deeper than circumstances alone. Your spirit can move forward while your mind is still healing from years of pressure. Your soul can recognize truth while your thoughts are still learning how to settle. Your calling can be alive and active while your inner world continues to recover. Return for a moment to that earlier question. What if the mental fog was never your identity? What if the heaviness you carried was never proof that you were behind? What if years of stress, disappointment, and survival simply trained you away from the clarity that God intended for you? There is something sacred about becoming clear again, not only spiritually, but emotionally and mentally as well. A clarity that allows you to be present, to notice what God is showing you, to make decisions without panic, and to receive peace without immediately questioning whether it can stay. That kind of restoration is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to the wholeness that was always waiting beneath the weight you carried. Now return to the heart of what matters most. No resource, method, or external support can replace the decision you already made. The deepest shift happened when you stopped partnering with the very thing that was draining your spirit. That is why this moment deserves your attention. Protect your clarity. Protect your peace. Protect the clean space that opened when confusion finally lost its hold on you. Do not let guilt rush you back into places you were released from. Do not let loneliness rename an old bondage and make it sound like belonging. Do not allow nostalgia to tell a story that leaves out the truth. This season is not about chasing signs, reopening old conversations, or testing whether old chains still fit. It is about honoring what has already been confirmed in your spirit. You may not see every result yet, and that is perfectly all right. Seeds do not become trees overnight. Doors do not always open with noise and spectacle. Some of the most important thresholds begin in stillness, and that stillness is not a delay. It is the first deep breath after years of living in survival mode. If the next step feels quiet, do not mistake that quiet for inactivity. Sometimes quiet means the old voices no longer have authority over your direction. Sometimes quiet means your spirit is no longer being pulled in 10 different directions. Sometimes quiet is simply God teaching you how to trust without needing chaos to prove that something is happening. What comes next is not striving. It is sealing. It is learning how to remain in agreement with what has already been unlocked. You will need language for this season. You will need reminders when old patterns attempt to negotiate their way back into your life. You will need to remember that a threshold once crossed deserves to be honored. The old season may still knock on the door from time to time, but it no longer carries the key. Heaven is not asking you to perform your freedom or convince others that something has changed. It is asking you to remain faithful to the truth, your obedience already revealed. The move has been made. The crossing is real. Today is about protecting what was established. You do not need to run back into noise to prove that growth happened. You do not need to explain your journey to people who only knew the version of you that existed before the crossing. You do not need to reopen old doors simply to see whether they still hurt. This is a day for honoring peace and allowing your body to learn that a quiet day can still be a meaningful one. Sometimes rest is the first sign that fear is no longer in charge. There are simple ways to honor what has shifted within you. Not because you need to earn anything, force anything, or speed up God's timing, but because small acts of agreement help your soul settle into what is already true. Resist the urge to seek one more message, one more explanation, or one more sign from something that has already shown you its nature. What feels like a search for closure can sometimes be an old attachment looking for another opportunity to speak. Trust what has already been revealed. Protect certain decisions with healthy privacy. Not every act of obedience needs an audience. Some things grow stronger when they remain between you and God for a while. Guard what has been confirmed before placing it in environments that have never honored your spirit. Choose one small physical space and bring order to it. It does not have to be dramatic. Sometimes when your hands participate in the process, your heart settles more deeply into the decision you have made. Let your surroundings reflect the shift that has already taken place within you. Write down one simple truth and let it stay where you can see it. Let it remind you that familiarity is not the same as peace. Let it speak to the part of you that still misses what was known simply because it was known. Allow it to anchor you when old patterns try to disguise themselves as comfort. Most of all, give yourself permission to rest without guilt. For many people, this is the hardest step. You may be accustomed to proving your worth through constant effort. You may have learned to stay busy because stillness felt uncomfortable. Yet today, let rest become an act of trust. Let stillness become agreement. Let yourself be human without apology. Chosen one, the next challenge may not look like a challenge at all. Peace can feel unfamiliar after years of pressure. A calm room can feel strange after years of noise. Safety can feel unsettling when your body has spent so long preparing for the next disappointment. Be gentle with yourself as you learn this new way of living. Do not run from peace because it lacks drama. Peace does not always create the rush that chaos once created. Instead, it restores the parts of you that constant pressure slowly wore down. It returns pieces of your heart, your mind, and your spirit that survival demanded you set aside. Healthy opportunities often arrive quietly. They do not demand panic, desperation, or self-abandonment. They do not require you to become smaller in order to belong. Sometimes they simply open before you with a clean invitation, and that can feel unfamiliar to someone who spent years navigating disorder. God does not always confirm his direction with dramatic signs. Sometimes his confirmation comes through the absence of old unrest. Sometimes it comes through a settled heart that no longer feels compelled to argue, chase, or prove. Sometimes it arrives as a silence that feels full rather than empty. If peace feels unfamiliar, allow yourself time to grow into it. If quiet feels new, allow yourself to trust it. If the next step feels simple, do not underestimate its value. Life may have taught you to respect only what exhausts you, but God does not need to wound you in order to guide you. The old season felt powerful because it was familiar. It had history. It knew your fears and understood exactly how to speak to your old wounds. It knew how to use urgency, guilt, and memory to keep its place in your life. Yet repetition is not authority. History is not destiny. Familiarity is not a command. You are allowed to outgrow what once held you. You are allowed to honor a season and still leave it behind. You are allowed to love people without giving them the same access they once had, and you are allowed to be grateful for what a chapter taught you without moving back in and living there again. That was the moment heaven recognized your yes, not when others finally understood it, not when results became visible, not when everything suddenly became easy. It was the moment your spirit chose alignment over attachment and obedience over the habits your emotions had grown used to following. Now, speak gently to the part of you that still feels unsteady. Let it know it is not being punished. Let it know it has not been abandoned. Let it know the old panic does not have to follow you into this new place. You are not losing yourself. You are releasing the agreement that kept you limited. And there is a clear difference between the two. Letting go of yourself would be self-betrayal. Letting go of an old agreement is healing. One diminishes you, while the other restores you. One drains your spirit over time, while the other brings you back into wholeness. One is fear disguised as loyalty, while the other is obedience wrapped in peace. Chosen one, this is the moment to speak the truth your spirit has been trying to settle into, not as performance, not as repetition, not as something you force into existence, but as words that help anchor your heart when old patterns try to pull you backward. Let them be simple. Let them be honest. Let them belong to you. I am not who the waiting season tried to shape me into. I am not only what I have survived. I am not only the weight I carried or the moments I had to endure alone. I am not the version of myself that was overlooked or misunderstood. I am not going back to what God already revealed and what heaven already witnessed. I am not rebuilding what I was freed from. I am not returning to confusion and calling it love. I am not shrinking again just to make old spaces comfortable. I can receive without guilt. I can rest without losing my direction. I can walk in obedience without needing approval. I can be misunderstood and still remain aligned. I can be quiet and still carry strength. I can be tender and still be finished with what I needed to leave behind. I can be alone in a season and still be held through it. I crossed the threshold and heaven saw it. I closed the door and heaven saw it. I chose the clearer path and heaven saw it. I stopped returning to what was breaking me and heaven saw it. I gave my yes to God in truth, even when my hands were shaking, and heaven saw it. Let those words settle inside you. Do not rush past them. Your spirit has carried many voices of doubt, fear, regret, and old patterns trying to redefine your obedience. But today, let truth become the voice that stays, not through volume, but through presence. You are not chosen to feel above others. You are chosen to walk with clarity. You are chosen to carry light without becoming dependent on recognition. You are chosen to step away when God leads you away, and to remain still when He asks you to wait. That is where real alignment lives. A threshold may be crossed in a single moment, but it is honored through how you live afterward. It is honored by what you stop feeding, what you stop reopening, and what you stop explaining once God has already closed it. So breathe here. Let your body soften. Let your mind settle. You do not need to carry every outcome right now. You do not need to see the full picture to trust the next step. The light you have is enough for today. The peace you feel is enough for this moment. The confirmation you carry is enough for this season. Tomorrow is already held in hands greater than yours. So allow the noise to fade for a while. Let the echo of the past remain only as an echo, not as instruction. What once happened in your life no longer has authority over where you are going. It can be remembered without being followed. Let this moment become a quiet seal over everything that has shifted within you. Not as performance, not as ritual, but as a simple agreement between your heart and God, who saw every hidden cost of your obedience. Thank you for seeing what no one else saw. Thank you for honoring the quiet yes that cost so much, and the quiet no that required strength I did not know I had. Thank you for working in the waiting, for shaping what comfort could not shape, and for protecting me even in what felt like delay. I release the old agreement. I release the need to be understood by those who were never meant to understand the depth of this journey. I release the urge to explain myself over and over again. I release fear disguised as wisdom. I release guilt that does not belong to me. I release the need to return to what I have already outgrown. Bless what is ahead of me. Bless the new space, even when it feels unfamiliar. Bless the quiet, even when I am still learning it. Bless the clarity that is still tender. Bless the courage that does not need attention to be real. Teach me how to receive without resistance. Teach me how to rest without guilt. Teach me how to recognize peace without doubting it. Teach me how to walk forward without dishonoring where I came from, and if anything from the past tries to return, let me remember what is true. If guilt rises, let truth answer it. If loneliness speaks, let presence be louder. If memory tries to soften what hurt me, let discernment bring me back to clarity. If fear asks me to return, let my steps stay forward. I will not return, not as a phrase, not as emotion, but as a settled truth inside me. I will not rebuild what was already released. I will not call confusion comfort again. I will not mistake fear for direction. I will not abandon the peace that was given to me. The waiting version of me has completed its season. The crossing has happened. The threshold is open, and now I move forward quietly, clearly, and fully aware that what is ahead no longer requires me to become small in order to belong.